while growing up, to me as a kid, everything that had a shadow was a ghost. So it doesn't matter if that's the shadow of me or the shadow of an object I already know. As long as light is casted on it and it protrudes some kind of reflections in form of shadows, I am pretty scared of it. So growing up with this, I get to learn and understand that actually for an object to exist and look realistic, there should be a shadow actually that is representing that particular element or that particular object, especially when there is presence of light. So in this design, we are going to learn how to create simple, subtle shadows in Adobe Illustrator and of course in Photoshop. So for today, we are going to start up with Illustrator. Okay, let's start up with Photoshop, which is the junior brother or younger brother to Illustrator. And by the way, if you don't know, Illustrator is older than Photoshop. Illustrator was actually created in 1987 and it was primarily created for the typesetting, the logo area, graphic styles, illustration, and it is now seen as a tool for both graphic designers and digital creators. You know, digital creator can use it creating paperback, book covers, and all of that. So they use it in creating many different digital products. Okay. So Photoshop, we are going to start up with you. So for Photoshop, as you can see in this one we have some subtle shadows from here. Very subtle. You can see it very clearly. I see many persons using shadows on logo. Don't use shadows on logo. Don't ever use shadows on your logo design. You can use shadows on flyer designs in most cases where it is very necessary. As you can see from here, we use shadow very subtly in this under this particular element layer. And it's not like it's a compulsory thing to do. There are necessity to it. I'm going to talk about that in another tutorial. But for today, we are just going to learn how to create these simple, subtle shadows in case you want to use it on any of your projects. So first off, we are going to delete this. Let's select and delete this. I usually like creating my elements in Adobe Illustrator. So we go back here. Let's put this to the front, arrange, bring to the front. Let's keep this here. And then we go to select the file, the element which you just created. Here, actually, I call this, you can actually have this as a graphic designer. Okay. I call this, my style guide. Okay, a style guide is simply a particular vector set of elements that makes your work easy. So if you actually want to create something, you don't need to repeat creating that particular vector shape. You just have to come, select it and modify it. For instance, I want to create a new mockup for a website. I just need to change the website domain name from here. I can still reuse this for the same sample of mockup that I've used previously. So with that out of the way, you can create your own by starting with a step. Just create a layout, then start dropping things. Anything you create, any new vector shape you create, drop it in. In the future, you may still need that. These have helped many of my students because many of them having issues creating some kind of elements, and I make it easier for them. Here is my color palette, as you can see from here. Here is my icons. I can extract my icons from here. Let me zoom closely so you see. See, I can extract my icons from here, and here are some other elements you are very, very relevant to it. Here's my color swatches. Here's my gradient swatches. Here is my vector pointer shapes, and so on and so forth. But that's out of the way. Let's continue with this. So when I select on this, we are going to pull this into, let's drop this into Photoshop. Fine. We are going to reduce the size a little. Now, the secret I'm going to teach you about shadows are secrets that are going to live along with you over time. This secret I'm teaching you, or I'm about to teach you, if you actually calm down and listen and learn and understand, try your best to understand. If you don't understand, try your best to rewatch the video again. Rewatch it again and rewatch it again, and you understand these simple secrets. If you understand the simple secrets, it is very simple for you to create any form of shadow. And this is the simple secret, this simple technique I use in creating a bunch of designs that have nice subtle shadows and making people wonder how this was created. So I'm going to teach you the same trick in this particular tutorial. So for Photoshop, to create a shadow, you can do that by double clicking on the layer element, okay? Click on the layer itself, the empty side. Don't click on the name. When you click on the name, you are going to get this. It's actually telling to rename it. So click on the empty side, double click on that. So when we double click on this, we are going to see this bunch of options. But for the one we are going to use today, we're going to just use the drop shadow. I think I've created the drop shadow styling already, but I'm going to destroy it so we can start afresh again. So let's select, when you select on the drop shadow, it doesn't mean when you select on drop shadow, it automatically selects on the settings. When you select on drop shadow, make sure you click on the drop shadow itself. Now, this is two different things. This is two different things. It's better you click on the drop shadow itself. It will select, and also it will select the drop shadow element for styling. That's open up the styling panel for the drop shadow for you, and also tick the drop shadow itself. So ticking drop shadow means I want the drop shadow to actually apply to this element. You get the point? Very good. So now when we select on the drop shadow element, it ticks and selects it and opens this particular layout for us to start styling the drop shadow for that particular element. On tick, you see the drop shadow is gone from that element. Tick, it appears for that element. On tick, it hides. Now, when we tick and enable these elements, I'm going to just play around with this. I'm just going to play around with this. I want to play around with this. Fine. I want to keep it as it used to be, normally as it used to be. Okay. So this is what you find. This is something close to what you find. Let me not say it's exactly what you find. You can find something like this. You can also meet something like this. It depends on the one you actually used the last time. So now we have something like this. Let's start creating our shadow. As you can see already, this doesn't look in any way close to what we have from here. It's not subtle. It's too harsh. It's too hard. The color is too deep. We don't want it to be noticed. Okay? We want it to be noticed, but we don't want it to be noticed. In the same way, I don't know if that's a word. So now we go to sizing. There are things you need to do. In distance, we are not going to use our distance tool here. I'm going to show you some other trick or some other way to play around with the distance so you can actually get things the way you want them to be. Okay? So we are going to start from opacity. We are going to still come back to all these elements to style them the way we want. Opacity, we can reduce it to about 6 or so. 6, 7 is okay, depending on the background color you are using. Some background color need higher opacity. Like if this background was a little more darker than it is, it will need a higher opacity because you can't place a black element and reduce the opacity and leave it on a black background and expect it to shine. It won't shine unless that particular layer of reduced opacity of shadow is on a bright background. If it's not in a bright background, if it's in between bright and dark, you need to play around with your opacity till you get the particular shadow opacity you are looking at. I hope you get that. That's number one rule. Now we move on to the second one. Second one is angle. Angle is what area do you want this particular shadow to intrude from. Okay, for me, angle is not very necessary. You can leave it as it is. We are going to still talk about that in a little while. Enabling this global angle is if you are using multiple shadows in the website, you want them to use the same style of shadow, you can enable the global light. So light means where the light is being casted on. Remember in the beginning of this, I told you I was a kid. When I was a kid, I used to be scared of anything that have a cast of light. So this means that this area simply means that light is being casted from the top left. Okay, when you click on the top right, light is being casted from the top right, which means if light is casted from the top right, we'll get the shadow from the bottom left. If light is casted from the top left, we get the shadow from the bottom right. If light is casted from the bottom left, it will get the shadow by the top left. And if light is casted from the bottom left, it will get the shadow by the top right. The same thing happens if we do it by the bottom, we get it at the top. We do it by the top, we get it at the bottom. We do it at the left, we get it at the right. We do it at the right, and we get it at the left. I hope you get that very clearly. That is very simple trick. That's number two. Number 3 is distance. Distance is how far you want this to go. What area do you want it to go? So as you can see, the distance from the left, if we cast the light from the right, you see what happens from there. Let's increase the opacity a little so we can see what is going on while we play around. So the distance is how far you want it to go from the element itself. Distance can be controlled by your mouse. So you don't need to use this to control the distance. So you don't like start playing around with the distance, finding a way to, no. You can do this with the mouse. Like watch what happens. You see, while you are still on this, you can actually control the distance and the angle at the same time. What's happening is that we are controlling not only the distance, we are also controlling the angle. When you move to the right, look at the angle area. Let me show you very closely. Look at this particular part. Okay? Look at this particular part very closely. When we move these elements to the bottom left, it only affects the distance. It doesn't affect the angle. But when we try to shift it to the right side, it affects the angle and also the distance, depending on how far we want it to be from the elements. So controlling this with this, I think, is the best practice. Now, we are going to leave it as it is, the distance, and I'm going to come back to the distance. I want to teach you something very important. So in the spread, you can say, okay, I want this to go further than as it is. Like, it's just like adding a kind of border radius or adding a kind of stroke around the shadow. So increasing the shadow intensity actually in size, not in visibility. So you can do that with the spread. Then the size is where we can play around. This is the size of the shadow. Okay, this is the shadow, or we call it feather size. The shadow, as you can see, as we are increasing it, the shadow is becoming more blurry. Okay, so this is where you control that. The shadow, you control it from this end. Now we are done with that. Those are the most important things. You can add noise if you want it to be noisy, but I don't think that's very important. Okay, now we are done with the drop down, but we are having a problem. By the way, let me point this very clearly. As you can see, this element over here, you see the shadow is pointing to the bottom left. That is because of the angle and the distance. You know, we talked about that in a little while when we say you can move this here or move this here. So depending on where your element is, point the light from that area. Like this element from here, we point the light from the top left so that the element's shadow will extrude to this part and make more sense. This one, we point from the top right to make the element's shadow extrude from this other area. Now, we are having a single problem. This is too busy and we don't want it that so. There are two things we can do. We can control the opacity and also control the size and the distance. Opacity, size, and distance. Forget about the spread. The spread is whatever size we want it to be. We can say, okay, be like so. We are okay with this. Okay. Now, the size is where is very important because this is the blurriness and what makes it faint out. Now, you can't control the size without controlling the opacity. So the two of them, you must have to work. You don't say, since I've worked on the opacity for the first time, I don't need to work on it again. Let me just work on the size. No. The amount of units you add to the size determines the amount of units you add or reduce from the opacity. Now, let me show you an instance of that. For instance, we increase this opacity like so, and it is too busy. We can now reduce the opacity to like so, making it a little bit lighter and making an element look as though it's floated. You get the point? Now, if we increase the opacity like so, and we reduce this particular size like so, and we want it to be something of this nature, it is okay as we want it. Okay? Best practice, like I said earlier before now, opacity, we are going to drop it around 7 or 8 or 5. Then the next thing, we are going to actually drag around this thing, like I told you, put it under. Now, if we leave it at the center and we increase the size to like so, let's increase the opacity a little. We don't want the shadow to show at the top side, show at the left and right, and at the bottom side too. No, that's not how shadow works. That's not how shadow works. Shadow don't work that way. Shadow usually is casted. Casting means it must have to fall at one end. It doesn't fall at the center. That is the big mistake many people make. They try to leave the shadow as it is in the middle, allowing shadow to actually flare around the element itself. That doesn't make any sense, and that's not professional. To make your shadow more professional, as you have created the opacity as so, you can drag this down. Make sure the top side doesn't have any amount of shadow. You see, the top side, as you can see from here, doesn't have any shadow, but the bottom side have shadow, which is the same thing we have from here. See the bottom side, it has a very nice shadow, but the top side doesn't have any shadow. That's actually what we want. Now, from there, we can now play around continually. We can reduce the opacity a little more to get exactly what we want. I think opacity of 10 would be okay. Let's put it to 10. 10 is okay. I think that size is okay. I think we are just done. We are just done. If you want, you can play around with the size to increase it a little more, to elevate the element, or to reduce it as you want. Just play around with the amount of this, and spread, leave it as it is. Distance, leave it. We have already corrected that by dragging around. So the opacity, we can make this 12. Let's see. Fine. So this is simply how to create this layer. If this was a particular element of a specific color, possibly purple or green or whatever color, you can select whether it's red. You can select on the red, and you can see we have the shadow over here. But a red shadow only complements a red element. Don't use elements of different colors on different element color. If you have a particular element color, don't use a different color. I'm going to show you the example from our Illustrator version or variant of this particular course. Okay, that's number one. Number two is that if we are actually using a particular color that is in between white and black, that is not any other color except white and black, make sure your shadow is in between white and gray. You get the point? So gray is also a lighter version of black, like as we have created from here. We can either say this opacity, increase it to 100% and select this color and make the gray lighter color. It is still the same thing as when we reduce the opacity. This is a singular color. See, it is pure gray from here. It's still the same achievement we achieve when we reduce the opacity. So white and black are not colors, okay? Those are parent colors. We call them, I call them authority colors, because they actually appears anywhere that other colors can work. So if you find out you are in a situation where you have white or a particular color that you are uncomfortable using the same color, not that it must be the same color, like there are some kind of green, like lemon green. You can't use lemon green shadow. Don't use lemon green shadow. Or royal blue, you are trying to use royal blue shadow. No, don't do that. You only apply this on colors that have higher contrast, like colors that have darker shades. Like as we have from here, see darker colors and so on and so forth. So since we understand that very clearly, let's head over to Illustrator and play around a little. So very quickly, we are going to do this. I don't have much time. So we reduce the opacity. We reduce the size, we reduce the size of the elements, and let's place it as it was before. So to create a shadow here, select on the element. So click on Effects, Stylize, Drop Shadow, okay? So from here, remember we are doing that for the element, only the elements outside. Don't do it for all of the elements. Select the element that is the box itself or the card itself. Select that element. Now we can play around with the shadow. In this one, you can't drag around as we are dragging around in Photoshop, okay? So now in this one, we set it to normal, not multiple. Set it to normal. Opacity, you can play around. We already talked about this in the previous one. Let's set the opacity to about 15 or 16, okay? You won't be seeing what you are doing until you tick the preview. I wonder why this preview is ticked. Okay, fine. Take the preview from here, you will be able to see it, okay? Be able to see what you are doing happening right in front of you. Let's increase the opacity a little more so we can see what we are doing. The X offset is the offset left and right. X is talking about left and right, okay? Okay, so we keep it to the center, make it 0. And Y offset, we want it to be 7, because if we make it 0, it's going to be like that one that is centered. So for it to be casted, let's leave it at 7. And the blur intensity, we can now increase the blur intensity to whatever intensity we want. Okay, now the color is where we can select the color. Remember what I told you about the color? We have to select the color that actually plays a vital role to actually put this stuff in brand. So we place that particular color, as we can see. Let's select a dark darker version of that particular color. Fine. So since we have that color from there, we can increase the opacity a little, or let's just reduce it a little, just very subtle. Fine. The Y offset is okay. Let's increase a little. Then the blur intensity, I think it's okay, like 7. Let's select this. Fine. Okay. Let's use a lighter version of that color. Fine. It plays a vertical role now. Better. So now we can reduce the opacity a little more, and Y offset, let's pull it up a little, and there we go. So this is how to create a shadow in Illustrator. So when we hit on OK, we have created the shadow we wanted. But the problem is when we want to actually edit this element, we may not find the property where we used to find it. So you are going to find the property inside the appearance. If you can't find the appearance, go to Windows and you're going to find appearance along this area. Where's the appearance? Appearance. Fine. Select the appearance. When you click on the appearance, this will appear. Okay, but this appears, that's not all you need. When this appearance appears, you can click on, scroll down until you see the one with shadow. Okay, then click on the shadow. If you do like this, you can now edit the existing shadow element. But if you don't do like so, the problem you are going to have is that if you create a new shadow, look what happens. Let's try to create a new shadow. So we go to effect and we say stylize drop shadow. It's going to bring up this prompt. It's telling us that this will apply another interface of this effect, which means we are not editing the current interface. We are adding a new layer of shadow to it, which is not what we want. So guys, that is how to create shadow in Adobe Illustrator and Adobe Photoshop. Okay, and I hope you enjoyed my story about when I was a kid and how scared I am about shadows and all of that. I don't know if that's actually real. Someone told me anyway. And by the way, Photoshop was created before Adobe Illustrator was created before Photoshop. Okay, not Photoshop. By the way, so Illustrator was created in 1987, and my name is Manuel from Kata Studios, and I was born in 1987. Literally. Do have a wonderful day, guys. See you in the next